Information shared on the following program is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute legal, tax, investment, or other advice, nor is it intended to recommend any particular investments, products, or financial instruments. Always seek advice from your financial advisor, attorney, or accountant with regard to investment, legal, or tax questions.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Oh, really? Apparently, you haven't heard of the stealth tax.
Welcome to the only show in the country dedicated to helping savers worry less about money, the WorryFree Retirement, with your host, best-selling author and fiduciary, Tony Walker.
At the height of World War II, Adolf Hitler ordered hundreds of German warplanes to cross the English Channel and bomb the heck out of its archenemy, England. And while many historians would argue that the German bombers were successful in reaching its intended target of England, German warplanes took heavy losses as their slow-moving bombers were easily detected by England's radar system and thus easy pickings for the fast-flying British Spitfire aircraft. Realizing they needed to come up with a better plan of attack, Hitler was approached with a new concept by a couple of aircraft-building brothers by the last name of Horton, who were confident they could build a plane that would fly much faster than the British warplanes and be less detectable by radar. This game-changing bomber, which luckily never made it off the ground, was referred to as the Horton HO-229. Today, we know this fast-moving and undetectable killing machine is simply the stealth bomber. And while the undetectable stealth bomber will have no effect on the amount of money you'll need in retirement, there is another sort of undetectable stealth tax flying around your money that will. Well, welcome, folks, to the Worry-Free Retirement. And yes, I am that little man in the sweater vest, financial stealth planning expert and fiduciary, Tony Walker. And today, we will be exposing an invisible force of nature and why the best defense against this financial force is not more worry, but having a game plan to use and enjoy your money before it's too late. But first, let me introduce the producer of the Worry-Free Retirement, someone who never goes unnoticed, America's favorite financial sidekick, Mr. Aaron Orander, along with his co-pilot at the graphics today, Mr. Derek Hudson. Okay, so there you sit, trying to figure out what in the world a World War II era German flight engineer and his brother trying to create a stealth bomber has to do with you and your money. Well, because whether you see it or not, the biggest stealth tax in the world and the forces behind it are chipping away at your money as we speak. And unlike all the other visible taxes you see being deducted from your paycheck each week or tossed regularly over to the government each year, this stealth tax is different, but just as destructive to your pocketbook and your ability to enjoy a worry-free retirement. And it's called inflation. So what exactly is inflation? Well, Webster's defines it this way: a continuing rise in the general price level, usually attributed to an increase in the volume of money and the credit relative to available goods and services. You see, the problem with this invisible tax on your money is that it is very hard to measure and see, but our financial radar knows it's out there somewhere. And knowing that the money we have in our pockets today may not buy as much as it could in the future, we allow the financial world to put fear into our minds as they constantly remind us of the destructive forces of inflation and why we need to not spend our money, or worse yet, put it at risk in an attempt to fight inflation. But there's a problem with this faulty advice, and that's what I'll expose today as I share more of my live well, die broke philosophy and how to have a fighting chance to use and enjoy your money without the fear of running out and this fear of inflation. Got some great stuff coming your way. You hang in there. I'm Tony Walker. I'll be right back. With the stock market at all-time highs and our nation's debt through the roof, There's a lot of uncertainty out there. Now may be the best time to safeguard more of your 401k. Let's get started today by logging on to TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Welcome back to the Worry-Free Retirement and our Live Well, Die Broke moment. And winner goes to LaDonna over in Shelby County, who was just awarded by her husband this beautiful little BMW. So LaDonna is going to be getting a $100 gift card, Visa gift card. And if you'd like to send in your Live Well, Die Broke picture, just send it to Gina at TonyWalkerFinancial.com. You'll be eligible for a drawing. These are randomly done once a month. You don't even have to have your photo that appears on there. Everybody's eligible for that $100 gift card. Thanks again for LaDonna for sending that in. Okay, during the height of World War II, with so much fear and uncertainty gripping the world, America's President Franklin Roosevelt had these prophetic words of encouragement when he stated to the people the following.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
It's true, you know. Fear is a stealthy kind of thing. I've discovered that we all have different things we fear, and this fear, in many cases, is really unwarranted and unjustified. The fear in World War II that Germany might create a stealth bomber that would fly faster than our planes and be undetectable by radar was legitimate, but never came to pass. So, too, are many of the fears that savers have about this future of their dollar and the effects of something we call the stealth tax, or economists call inflation. For instance, take the cost of housing, a topic we've covered in great deal over the past few weeks on this show. Back in 1963, the year my parents incidentally bought their first home in Lexington, Kentucky, a home my mom still lives in, by the way, it was around $16,000. Now, that same home, if we fast forward to 2020, look at the cost of a home today, it's around $280,000. Now, that, my friend, is a great example of inflation. But is this number real or is it relative? In other words, was the amount of money my parents borrowed for their first home in 1963 the same as today's housing cost? And the answer is yes, it is. But Tony, you say, well, that's crazy. How can you say that the measly 16 grand your parents borrowed in 1963 is the same that I might have to borrow $280,000 today? And therein lies the mystery of something we call inflation. Because it's all relative, and believe it or not, you have more control over inflation than the financial world would have you believe. Take the cost of housing again and where you might decide to live in retirement. If you choose to buy a modest home in Kentucky, you're going to spend around $146,000. But if you choose to move to San Francisco, look at the cost of housing and the associated taxes that go along with it. So when all of this talk of inflation and the fear that ensues starts gripping us, here's my response. Remember, none of this is real, but simply manufactured by those who control the money. I call this phenomenon of controlling the levers of the money the golden rule of money. And simply defined, the golden rule of money says this: the one who makes the rules, gets the gold. And with the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the ability of our friends in Washington to borrow as much money as the Treasury can print, we will always have a stealth tax, or what economists call inflation. But the actual cost of inflation will vary, and the value of our money will too. Take a look at a few periods of time in our country where this inflation really fluctuated. Notice right after the Great Depression, this is interesting, when the stock market collapsed, our country experienced deflation. In other words, if you were lucky enough to have a few bucks in your pocket with everything crashing and nobody buying anything, the money you had was actually worth more. Then we fast forward to 1947, a few years after World War II, all the GIs returning and everybody's spending money like there's no tomorrow. Activity, the economy starts roaring back, and yep, you guessed it, inflation was up to 19%, meaning this $100 bill would only buy about 80 bucks worth of stuff. Now we fast forward today with the stock market at all-time high and the nation's debt approaching $30 trillion. Why do the powers that be tell us that inflation has actually been very low? Well, my response, it's got to be because none of this is real. So here's the thing. I'm going to come back and I'm going to prove that none of this is real by answering an interesting question that came to me recently about this whole stimulus that the country is going to be getting and how it's going to affect your dollar both now and in the future. I'm Tony Walker. Let me get the whiteboard out, and yeah, I'm going to give me another cup of coffee as well. I'll be right back. Have you recently retired, been laid off, or offered a pension buyout? Has the company you work for moved, been acquired, or closed its doors forever? And finally, do you have a 401k with a previous employer you'd like to move to safer territory? Then take advantage of this opportunity to move your 401k or lump sum pension to Tony Walker Financial. Let's meet in person to discuss your retirement options. Log on now to TonyWalkerFinancial.com to schedule your free, no obligation appointment. Let us help you today. Our Tony in the Trenches question is kind of paraphrased. A gentleman I was talking to out of Lexington by the name of Dave had this to say. He said, Tony, with the recent $1.9 trillion stimulus passed by Congress, please explain to me why the stock market keeps going up and why this might mean for me and how much money, what this might mean for me and how much money I will actually have in the future. So in order for me to understand the world, now this is the world according to Tony, and the things around me that I have little to no control over, I've started using this blanket statement that I really think helps me at least follow along with the world's course, and it's this: none of this is real. And to help you understand why I might say this, I thought I would try to explain in as layman's terms as I can this concept of this stealth tax, or what we call inflation, and why this whole financial world is not as complicated as the financial world wants you to believe it is. So first of all, Aaron, let's put up full screen our definition of inflation. It's a continuing rise in the general price level, usually attributed, this is the key point I'm going to cover on the whiteboard, to an increase in the volume of money, another key word, and credit relative to available goods and services. Okay, that's a mouthful, but let me see if I can take a stab at this. I'm going to mosey over to the whiteboard, and we got a lot of stuff going on here. First of all, we talked earlier about the money game, the golden rule, and that is the one who makes the rules gets the gold. And if you don't believe me, folks, just look at what's going on right now with this recent $1.9 trillion stimulus. And my response to this, and hopefully after this little dissertation on the whiteboard, you'll agree with me that none of this is real. So let's start with the money game, and let's just start with our economy. A lot of people get really confused about the role of Congress and the Federal Reserve and the Treasury and all of this stuff. So let me see if I can boil this down. Again, really, really simple stuff when you think about it. First player we have is Congress. And when you think about it, Congress is basically a group of representatives, right? We voted them into the office. And what they are going to do is they're going to have the ability to borrow money. Okay? Borrow money and spend money and tax money. That's all they do. Congress does not print any money, folks. People say the politicians are printing all this money. No, they're authorizing the borrowing of money. And you say, well, where do they get that money from, Tony? They borrow the money from the U.S. Treasury. Okay? And the Treasury is basically the one responsible for printing money. And then we talk about low interest rates. You know, we've had such low interest rates in this country for years, and it's been devastating for savers. I mean, don't believe me? Run down to your local bank and see if you can find any of those old 6% CDs you used to get. It has devastated the ability for savers to earn a decent return on their money. We call this cost of money. And the problem is when you lower the cost of money basically down to zero, it helps some people, but it hurts a lot of people. Now, who sets those interest rates? Well, that's the Federal Reserve. And back in 1913, I'm not trying to pick sides here or say we shouldn't have ever had a Federal Reserve, but if you read the history of the Federal Reserve when it was created in 1913, many, many people feared this happening because they would handle the levers and control all the money and thus lower the cost of money or raise it and manipulate the economy too much, which most people feel they do. Now, Congress just recently pushed out to the consumer $1.9 trillion, and you may be one of those folks that just got your $1,400 stimulus check. Now, why in the world would they borrow money from us and then send it right back to us? Because we've got to pay back the investors who loaned the money to the Treasury in the first place. They're called government bonds. And there's trillions and trillions of dollars that people, I've got some government bonds, that have loaned money to the government, and the government has got to push that money back to the consumer. You see, folks, for this whole money game to work, money has to keep flowing, and that money has to come from somewhere. Now, you might say, well, Tony, you're not answering my question, or that fella Dave's question. What are we up to, almost $30 trillion? How in the world are we going to pay that back, partner? The answer to that question is, I have no idea. I have certain theories about that I won't get into, but it is something that probably is insurmountable. So we're going to have to go to some sort of global economy. You're seeing things like fiat, Bitcoin, all this stuff coming out. There's no way a country, unless you just tax everybody to death, can pay back $30 trillion. So what does this have to do with our everyday world and life? And Tony, can you make sense of this to help describe inflation? And I'm going to do that with housing, okay? So if we have this, we're going to have this, and this is going to look really similar. We start off with a seller. So let's say someone is selling a house, right? And we're going to say that would be like Congress. That's you. Maybe you're selling your house. Well, you got to have a buyer. There has to be a consumer out there interested in buying your house. And more than likely, somebody is going to be lending money, okay, to the borrower, and that money goes to the seller. So the seller sells the house to the borrower. The buyer, that is, has to have a supplier. He's got to have the house, or if you're building a house, you've noticed this. You know, the cost of lumber. You know what's going on with the cost of lumber right now? As we record this show in March of 2021, a typical, let's say, OSB 4x8 board, you guys will know what I'm talking about, was about $9 or $10. A couple of years ago, it's $30. So the thing is, because there's so much money filtering into our economy, so much low interest money, people are willing to pay a lot more for building materials to build a house. Why are they doing that? Because people are lending it at such low rates. So again, Aaron, let's put up full screen the definition of inflation, and you're going to wonder why the cost of housing is so darn high now, because look at those key words. Money supply, it's flowing like crazy, okay? Even though you might say it's funny money, it doesn't matter. That money is flowing back into consumers because credit, the interest rate being charged for that money, is so low. So now what does this have to do with retirement planning, Tony? This is a huge issue, and many of you are running into this. So let's take the average person I work with who's already retired. Maybe they're saying, well, I want to downsize. I don't need 6 bedrooms and 5 baths and all this stuff I had when my kids were young. I'm going to downsize and maybe build a small home somewhere. Well, that's fine. You're the seller, and since everybody's wanting to buy homes, you know, low inventory, right? Everybody's got money, low interest money that drives prices up. You're excited because you can sell your home for maybe a lot more than you paid for it. But then what happens is you turn into the buyer. And then you have to go through the supply chain, and you're either going to have to find a home to replace it, or you're going to have to build another one. So the question is, even if you're getting top dollar for your home, if you have to go out and spend top dollar for a new one, you're right back to the same predicament. You see what I mean by it's all relative. So folks, when you're sitting down doing retirement planning and thinking about money, the point is your game plan has to include the ability to use and enjoy this money now rather than later. Because if we continue to have inflation, these low interest rates, it's going to drive prices up. And this is what they're worried about right now as we come out of this pandemic. People are ready to spend money, and it's going to drive prices up. So here's what I would suggest. If you don't have somebody that's helping you think through expenses and income and enjoying your money now versus later, my question is, why not? Let's sit down and talk. Let's go through a complete game plan. We can look at your 401k, your savings, maybe a recent inheritance, and set up a game plan so you can use and enjoy this money before it's too late, and yes, without the fear of running out of it. To get started with Tony Walker Financial, just log on right now to TonyWalkerFinancial.com, TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Click on that Let's Get Started, or call the toll-free number on your screen. All right, what does the Bible have to say about money, possessions, and inflation? Oh, it's got a lot to say, but first, let me get a cup of coffee. I'll be right back. I am retirement specialist Tony Walker, and I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes to share with you a little bit about my story, my history in this business, and how we've become so successful in helping savers worry less about money. You know, over the past 35 years, I didn't always focus on the saver personality, as I like to call it. Years ago, I used to do a lot of money management. In fact, I've been licensed to sell securities and insurance products since 1986. So I've been able to see all of the major downturns the stock market can offer. But quite frankly, the worst downturn that I experienced personally in my practice was the tragic event of 9/11. You see, right before 9/11, if you go back in time, you could throw a dart at a dartboard and pick your stocks. Everything was doing well. And I guess I took it for granted that everything would always go up. In fact, most of my clients during the 90s were in the stock market and doing very, very well, quite frankly. But then, when they flew into those Twin Towers and everything came tumbling down, not only the Twin Towers, but for 3 years in a row, the stock market went down. I realized that, you know what? I don't like risking my money, and I don't like risking the money of my clients. So following 9/11, I took about the task of trying to find a product and a process that would not only protect my clients' money, but show them how to use and enjoy it, and thus the worry-free retirement process was born. Now, just to clear up some confusion, a lot of people know that we do a lot of annuities. In fact, some people kid in my business, call me the annuity king, because personally I've written about as many annuities as anybody in the country. So yes, I love fixed annuities, fixed indexed annuities, and fixed interest annuities. By the way, sometimes people will talk about variable annuities. We do not do variable annuities due to the risk and high fees associated with them. But besides writing a ton of annuities, I still have my roots buried in the investment world. So contrary to what many of our competitors might say, we do provide a great investment platform, one of the lowest cost investment platforms in the industry, currently using Charles Schwab as our custodian. So not only do you get myself with 35 years of experience, but you also get varying products. You get annuities. We offer life insurance. We have investment products through our Charles Schwab platform. And most importantly, you get a team of service experts that's going to be with you in retirement long after the sale. You see, folks, retirement is not just a one-shot deal. You don't leave your employer and roll your 401k over to somebody and say, I've got a retirement plan. Retirement planning is much, much more. In fact, there's a huge difference between a retirement planning specialist such as us and maybe what you would call a wealth manager or money manager or even a financial advisor. So not only are we fiduciaries, but all we do is retirement planning. So that sounds like you. If you feel like nobody's really in your corner, if you don't have a written game plan that you can follow and monitor, if you feel like maybe you got too much money at risk, or that your advisor is not really paying close attention to the details of taxes and fees and Social Security, all that goes into understanding retirement planning, why don't you give us an opportunity? There's no cost or obligation to meet with me in person. If you're retired or nearing retirement, we can help. So why don't you just click on the Let's Get Started button, and when you click on that button, here's what's going to happen. Your information is confidentially sent to our office. We don't share that information with outsiders whatsoever. You will be then contacted and arrange either a phone call with myself or to meet in person to discuss your situation. Well, I look forward to talking to you soon.
And now, back to the Worry-Free Retirement with your host, Tony Walker.
Earlier, we shared this famous quote by FDR, who during the height and fear of World War II said this:
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
You want to know my translation to this? Here goes. Remember, none of this is real. Yet, if you're a student of the Bible, you know that fear and worry are a big part of God's message to His followers. In fact, when it comes to the topic of money and possessions and the worry and concerns thereof, we have to consider that God gives advice and admonitions on the subject of money and possessions all the time. In fact, He mentions it in the Bible more than He mentions heaven and hell. I guess God knew that we humans would worry over money and that the world would create a lot of fear regarding its effect on our futures. Which has been the whole point of our show, folks, and that is this. All this stuff you see, the creation of money out of thin air, the ability for the financial world to make money on our money, the worry of whether the money in our bank accounts will be attacked by the stealth tax of inflation, or worse yet, even be there one day. In and of itself, none of this is real. How do I know this? Because we know that one day our lives here on earth will end. All of this stuff, all of this worry, all of these things that are out of our control will cease to exist. This is why I coined the phrase and wrote a book called Live Well, Die Broke. The simple message of this book is to remind us all that we have today or we have tomorrow, and neither one is going to last. All of this stuff is temporary. And if something does not last or stand the test of time, my question is this: is it real or not? You know, this $100 bill that I hold in my hot little hand, we just proved it's not real. It is just a representation of what we hope the government or someone else will give us in return. In fact, in 1932, these $100 bills would have actually been worth about $110 adjusted for inflation. But then, all of a sudden, the stealth tax rears its ugly head. In 1947, this same $100 bill was only worth about $80. Tomorrow, what does that hold? Well, who knows? And since Jesus knew we'd be consumed with such goofy thinking and worry, he reminds us of how we're supposed to deal with it. And it's found in Matthew 6:34, where he simply says this: "Do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself." But that's where the world can make us believe that we need to worry. You know, the game of money involves a set of changing rules that constantly sneaks up on you and I and causes us to worry about tomorrow. In fact, the richest man in the world of his day, Solomon, saw this very same thing play out, where he reminds us in Ecclesiastes 7:14 the following. He said, "In the day of prosperity, be happy, but in the day of adversity, consider. God has made the one as well as the other." Well, why? So that man may not discover anything that will be after him. My interpretation, there you go, that's right, remember, none of this is real. So Tony, you say, what am I supposed to do? Well, my advice, first acknowledge the fact that you aren't going to be here forever and you could be taken up in a moment's notice. And when it comes to your money, keep it really, really simple and do this: plan for tomorrow, but live for today. Get with someone who cares more about you than they do making a bunch of money on your money. Take on this live well, die broke attitude, and you get with someone that you can trust to advise you along the way, and I can assure you, you'll worry a whole lot less about money. And my friend, you can take that to the bank. Well, how about you? If you're sitting there thinking, I don't have anybody, Tony, that I can feel that can sit down and really go over my finances, someone who can take my 401k or look at the money in the bank that I have, or maybe what to do with this recent inheritance I'm about to receive. Well, if you don't have someone you can trust, my question is, why not? My name is Tony Walker, and for the past 36 years, I've been helping savers worry less about money, and I can help you too. To get started to learn more about Tony Walker Financial, let me invite you to go to our website right now at TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Once there, just click on the Let's Get Started button, and we can meet in several ways. We could start with either a free 10-minute fiduciary phone call just to find out more about your situation, and of course, if it warrants, we'll be happy to meet with you in person at either our Bowling Green, Louisville, or Lexington, Kentucky offices. So do it now. TonyWalkerFinancial.com. Click on that Let's Get Started or call the toll-free number on your screen. Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's program. I've sure enjoyed being with you. But you remember, between now and next week when I see you again, if all else fails, you be worry-free. Make it a good one.